my name is Desiree Yael Vester. I am the caretaker of the Lesbian Herstory Archives. I have been honored to hold that position since 2003. Lou, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Lou McCarthy. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the Director of Archives at the LGBT Community Center in the West Village. And I have been on staff here since 2017.
Yay. So I am going to give a little background on the inspiration for this project and then what our goals are, past, present, and future. The idea for this project has been in my mind for about 20 years. I encountered one of the collections we have at LHA, which is called the African Ancestral Lesbian Subject Files, which are these incredible clippings files of anything having to do with Black lesbians. Up to a certain point, they're constantly being updated, but they were digitized in 2012. And so those materials are available through a variety of means that we'll talk about later. But it was just so inspiring to be able to go through those files and see all these materials that I know would be harder to find if they had not been combined into these folders. And then later on, when I was doing my thesis, I used a book called The Black Lesbians, an annotated bibliography by a librarian named J.R. Roberts, who went through the LHA collection looking for anything in the collection having to do with Black lesbians. And then she created this book that was published by NIAD. It was incredibly useful. It has a foreword by Barbara Smith, where she talks about some of the reasons why we wanted to do this project, which is the lack of access to materials about Black lesbians in the sort of community discourse and literature, and the power of seeing yourselves reflected in the materials that you gather, and also just the importance of Black lesbian herstory. So I got a reference question about a year ago. A graduate student who was an artist was making a zine or a graphic novel, and she had found some images of Black lesbians from Jet magazine. And when the African American Natural History Museum, who holds all of the materials, they said, we don't have any indexing, we don't have any cataloging, we can't tell you what issue this image came from. We can't even tell you who owns the copyright. And it was kind of infuriating because the Johnson family that owned Jet magazine and Ebony magazine was huge and wealthy. And while the museum had been given funds to collect the materials and store the materials, house them, they were not given any funding to catalog them or index them or in any way provide any kind of like access to them. And so the combination of all of those things made me realize that there is actually something that we could do to improve the access to materials about Black lesbians here at the Lesbian Herstory Archives and at the LGBT Community Center. We have a long history of working with the LGBT Community Center National Archives on different kinds of projects, but also I frequently send researchers there when they have something that we don't have, and et cetera. And so I thought this would be a great project for us to work together when this grant came up. And so that's sort of the impetus of this project. And then our goals are pretty straightforward. We would like to provide access to researchers to all the materials in our respective collections about Black lesbians across all of the collections. So that includes personal papers, subject files, everything, eventually everything. The scope of this collection right now is what you see in front of you: periodicals, all the different iterations of that, special collections, organizations, subject files, and in media. Each one of these has some challenges and some sort of specific ways that we have to handle the materials. So with the periodicals, there is actually a lot of information about periodicals in general, but there's not a lot of subject indexing that would let you know that a periodical is about Black lesbians or by Black lesbians, unless that is in the title. So for a lot of these sort of historical publications, we had to do some digging and research, and it's been kind of painstaking, but amazing. I love spreadsheets, so it's just been an opportunity to sort of dig into the spreadsheets. With the special collections, some of the considerations that we had with the special collections, so even the index that we have on our website of our special collections does not represent all of the special collections that we have, because some of the collections have restrictions about who can access them and when, whether or not they can be put into any kind of list that is on the internet. And so we had to, it was sort of a subset within a subset within a subset of the special collections that are by or about Black lesbians, individuals or organizations, but then also the ones that have given us permission to put the name of the collection on the internet, which is sort of a small subset. But you know, that is something that we are always going to have to work with in terms of challenges at a community archive, because we have different kinds of privacy considerations, and we want to respect the desires and needs of the people who have donated their materials to us. So that is one sort of qualification that I want to make. Whatever special collections you can see, there are always going to be at least, 50 that you can't see. And then in terms of organizations and subject files, those are pretty straightforward. We don't have any restrictions on organizations other than the publication of, entities in their whole. So like, we're not going to completely digitize someone's program from a conference if we don't have copyright permission. But otherwise, they are very much available on the website and searchable through our research guide. And then media, that's a whole other kettle of horses. Okay. Photos, film, video, all of that has different kinds of considerations with regard to people in the media and whether or not they want their faces to be on the internet, plus the people who created the material, et cetera, ad infinitum. So we sort of have to consider all of that as we're adding things to the research guide. Luckily, a lot of things have been cleared by other entities, so we were able to add them into the guide. I think that as long as there is homophobia and misogyny, there will always be a lot of considerations that we have to make for how we share information about materials in LGBT archives. And I think it's important to make sure that researchers understand those limitations. And also it's an opportunity for a researcher to come physically into the space, so they can actually see some of the things that we can't provide access to on the internet. And so I think it's really important to think about that. A lot of times we have researchers who will ask, well, why can't, they're very frustrated that they can't just go on the website and see everything. So I think it's important to have that kind of interchange with people who are using the materials. As frustrating as it is, I think it's really important. The other thing that we wanted to talk about were some of the things that we have not yet added to the guide. That would include books and anything that includes an image. So photos, object files like our graphics, t-shirts, buttons, other ephemera. We will eventually add those things, and we may not always exist in Airtable. Right now, Airtable is a really useful tool for presenting the information that we've collated, but we're not, tethered to it forever. Okay, so I wanted to switch over to the Airtable. This is our sampler. This Airtable combines across collections, both of our collections. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about while we're looking at this is metadata schema. I looked at Dublin Core. I think that eventually we are going to apply a modified Dublin Core schema to the materials, but for the purposes of the presentation, we kind of had to reduce everything to what was most accessible. So we have less fields than I think we will eventually have, but for now, we have sort of done a very basic cataloging. of the materials so that they're easy to find. Because Airtable is keyword searchable, you don't necessarily have to understand what the subject headings and everything are. You can just sort of do a keyword search. So you can do Audre Lorde and you will just find Audre Lorde wherever she exists. Also, the Airtable will be filterable. So if you want to be able to filter a particular column or a particular content type, you'll be able to do that as well. This has not been published yet. We're just sharing this for the presentation. I'm hoping that we will publish in February for Black History Month. Lou and I can sort of get together and figure out the best way to do that. I think that is everything for now with the spreadsheet. Thank you, Airtable.
Thanks, Desiree. It's exciting to see that little sneak peek. That's great. So just jumping off of what Desiree's been sharing, as she mentioned, we will get together and huddle about launching the guide for February 23 for Black History Month. We are also looking at doing more promotion of it and perhaps some programming and events around it for the occasion of Women's History Month in March. And then, of course, there's June, Big Pride Month in next year. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about this project is the way that the guide can kind of be like iterated and flexible over time, and we can be adding to it and, not necessarily wedded to Airtable, but all of the information and the indexing that we're creating with it going into the future. For me as well, joining on to this amazing project, and I have to give Desiree credit. I mean, what she was describing about the inspiration and kind of the development of the grant application. I mean, just so many kudos and so much gratitude for her work there. For me at the center as a lone arranger, a solo archivist, I took over in 2017 from the founding volunteer archivist who was working, 27 years, like part-time, unpaid, and credit to him, Rich Wandel, he really did build like an incredible archive with a team of volunteers, leading volunteers. And taking over from him in 2017 as the first full-time staff archivist at the center provided a lot of challenges. And one of my main challenges is around accessibility. So this project was key for me because of the way that Desiree is envisioning this public accessibility. So the fact that this guide will be linked to on both LHA's website and the Center Archives website will be able to make it freely accessible. So that does not necessarily mean anything digitized for, purposes of sharing out online, but the guide itself will be. So that can allow us to share either digital mediated access if material is digitized, or it will allow us to reach researchers who can then come in on site and access these materials. I think the potential to program around this both together, as Desiree mentioned, our history of working with LHA, that's been really important to me, and we've been lucky to continue that during my tenure, and but also reaching other institutions, other repositories, and other partners. I'm not the most social media savvy, but I will mention that just taking Instagram, for example, LHA and the center each have about 50,000 Instagram followers, which is kind of unfathomable to me, but yeah, I mean, that's a lot of people. So we just combining our powers can reach so many more. And then in addition to that, just to take two examples of some of the work that I'm doing, we have an advisory group for the archives, and that consists of a diverse cross-section of archivists, historians, and memory workers, including folks who are working at Visual Aids, the Schomburg Center, the One Archives, just to name a few. And being able to tap into that network is going to be really important, as well as potentially recruiting some folks to add to the research guide. Not to count our chickens, but I think it would be in their best interest. And then just one other example of some of the way I'm working to grow out our network. We have every month, we host a meetup in the archive space here on 13th Street. That's every first Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. And that is an informal gathering of anybody who is doing work in or is enthusiastic about queer history, very broadly. So it's, diverse across age, race, discipline, experience, professional experience. So that's another arena that I really value for being able to share out different projects and announcements, and would be happy to welcome anybody tuning in to join us there. I will also speak just a little bit about the significance and the impact that this project has, at least from my perspective. I think that one thing about the center's records that are so important to highlight is the kind of vast potential of them. And I think in some ways, some of our collections are very much front and center. Their finding aids are posted on our website. People can find them via Google even. Now, these are mostly the manuscript collections that we've been able to process over the years. And these were typically donated by individuals or organizations. But we also have vast holdings in the center's own records, so departmental records that were transferred to the archive at some point since 1990 and deemed to have historic value. These records are intermittently described, so even I am not sure what all is there, not yet anyway. But it's hundreds, if not thousands, of cubic feet of material, and only partially described, as I mentioned. And then you also have to look at some of the challenges around the description itself. So the center, having had only one kind of archivist over its history, and then kind of passing along to only another one archivist. And I myself, I am not the same gender identity as my predecessor, but I am also white. And so when I'm looking through the collections and the description, I have to take a second, I have to take a beat to consider, okay, who was cataloging this? Who knew what they were even looking at, given that it was all volunteer powered? And what can we do to improve that? So I think the fact that we had this project to really welcome our researchers in and be able to review the materials. So I might take like a very briefly described kind of essentially like a box inventory and call material in because it might have relevant material for the project. And then we learn that it does, that is improving our mission to serve the LGBTQ community of New York, because that includes all folks, right? And um, that's going to matter for how we can serve these people. And then we're also able to kind of turn that back around and connect across repositories and other resources. So already I'm seeing the kind of rings, the like rings in the pond that this splash is making. I think that while we're in this moment since George Floyd's murder in 2020 and the sort of uprising of anti-racist efforts in the summer of 2020 and since, like, it's really important that we're not just kind of repeating the same names or taking a look at only the same few people. So the fact that we're able now to kind of grow this resource to center Black lesbians' contributions over the years, and that includes somebody as well known as Audre Lorde, who you can see in this photograph, reading at the center's Second Tuesday series in 1986. But just a few years after that, Jewel Gomez, amazing erotic kind of fantasy writer, also spoke at the series. I don't hear her name as much, but I think that including her on this guide is going to contribute to this effort, because truly I think some of the beauty of this project is that it does cross social movements. So we have a tendency sometimes to kind of silo off identities or social movement efforts, but when you're looking at the work that Black lesbians have done and thinking about, the Combahee River Collective, just for one obvious example, like the work that they're doing crosses all social areas and demographics. And then finally, because we are really not to say discovering anything new because it's been there and the decision was made to preserve the material, but we are kind of uplifting some of these records. And so we do anticipate that this will inspire new work, both scholarly and creative. And given everything about the present moment, that's urgent.
I just wanted to piggyback on something that you mentioned because I did talk about this in one of our meetings, but I have been at LHA since 1994. I came here as an intern, and then I became a coordinator, and then I became the caretaker. And in that time, I have heard endless stories about the Daughters of Bilitis, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about the Daughters of Bilitis. I knew there was that one Black woman, Ernestine, who was on the cover of one issue of the Ladder, and I knew about Lorraine Hansberry writing letters. But what I did not know is that there was a Black lesbian that LHA had interviewed for our video project where we did oral histories of the Daughters of Bilitis. And the reason I didn't know is because nobody identified the woman as Black. And I was going through, for this project, I was going through all of the interviews, and I took one look at this woman. I was like, that's a Black woman. And I realized, I knew this already, but I realized the importance of having people who look like the people you're doing research on actually examining the materials, because hundreds of people had taken a look at this one woman and never noticed that she was a Black woman. And I know that because whenever I asked about the Black women, nobody ever brought up her name. And then that led me to an article that a different Black librarian had written about the 3 Black women who were part of the Daughters of Bilitis who were not Ernestine. And so it just sort of solidified for me how important this kind of work is, and also how important it is that Black cultural workers are actually sort of engaging with these materials and pulling out information that maybe other people wouldn't notice.
Absolutely. That's an amazing story. I mean, I'll give one back of my own, which is we have the papers of Joyce Hunter, who is an incredible activist, advocate, helped found Heydrich Martin, and nowhere in our very thorough, extensive finding aid does it mention that she's a biracial Black woman, and that's essential info. I want to know that about one of our kind of founding figures, who I'm happy to say I just saw on a virtual program about the March on Washington. So she's fun. But yeah, that's what that reminds me of, Desiree. So if we can continue this work together, I think it will only be a good thing. And with that segue, the future.
We would love to get additional funding to carry this mission forward. We're sort of thinking about, once we get to a sense where I feel like we have refined it as a tool, we'll be in a position to maybe reach out to other queer institutions, definitely the Schomburg. I'm going back to the American History Museum of African American Culture. And I think that it's a tool has a lot of potential. Even if we can just share it with all of the queer archives and special collections as a unified tool that we can all contribute to, I think that would be incredible. And I think that the topic of Black lesbians is so broad and expansive. There could never be enough, as far as I'm concerned. I do think that one of the challenges that I experienced in doing this research is connected to what Lou just said, which is there has been sort of 2 parallel lines of thinking, right? There has always been librarians and archivists who have contested the idea of having subject headings that do not reflect the people that they're describing. So there's that on the sort of like the Sanford Berman, path. And then there are the people who sort of don't want to objectify marginalized people in the cataloging and description of them. But I would say that my perspective is that inclusive cataloging, ethnic, racial, gender, disability, inclusive cataloging needs to be direct. When I am doing research, I want to see the word Black lesbian. and Black women and African-American women, third world women, women of color, all of it, okay? And also, speaking of women of color, it is a great umbrella term, but it is general, So if I'm looking for Asian lesbians, just saying women of color does not tell me that. So I think it's really important to sort of challenge the way that materials about marginalized people are described, and then also make the road by walking, in our own institutions, really think about the metadata schema that we want to use and the authority file that we want to use and the thesaurus, and not be afraid to use sort of challenging terms if those terms are honest and accurately reflect the materials that we are processing or cataloging or working with. We have a lot of thank yous. I would personally like to thank Olivia Newsom, one of the interns at LHA, who definitely helped get these slides together. I want to thank Lou for being an incredible partner on this project. I would also like to thank Linda McKinney for creating this fabulous jacket in our last slide. It is one of my favorite Black lesbian objects in LHA. It is hand stitched. Thank you to Linda. And then also thank you to Erica Hendricks and Rachel Brenner, who are former interns who became consultants on this project. They did incredible work. Not everyone loves spreadsheets as much as I do. We had at least 50 spreadsheets that we were working with simultaneously. So I just want to thank them for persevering and being super available and reliable. And lastly, thank you to Metro for giving us this opportunity to do this project, to work together and to, learn more about our own collections and about each other's collections, and to share this information with the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.